Hi, I'm Dr. Mikah Sellers, and welcome to Forces of Change, where we decode disruption at the intersection of technology, policy, and purpose.
And I'm Anna Graziani, co-host of Forces of Change.
And today we have with us a very special guest, Rob Sweetman, who is going to help us understand some of the most pressing issues facing the military and veteran communities today. Rob?
Hey, how are you guys? Happy to join you.
Thanks so much. I'd love for you to be able to provide the audience with a little bit of background on you, kind of your origin story, so to speak, and the work that you're doing with 62 Romeo and Sleep Genius.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to do that. Boy, I feel like each chapter and each year just makes the plot thicken a little bit. Well, I grew up in a farm town and then sort of moved around the country as a kid. Always felt like I was a warrior and felt like I should be in the military, but I never pursued the military until I was at the final countdown, right? I didn't sign up for the military until 28 years old. And so that was a cutoff. And I still was in the delayed entry program for like 6 months. So I was really trying to stretch it out. I went through a Navy SEAL team training program. We call it BUDS and SQT. And I didn't show up until the SEAL team until I was 30. And so you can imagine, like, some of these guys are like 20 years old and I'm the old guy. And at this age, 30 feels young, right? But at the time, I felt very old and definitely was having a hard time keeping up with the younger guys. What I observed was a lot of trauma surrounding killing terrorists and watching your brothers and sisters die. And a lot of times that was compounded with bad behaviors that dudes and ladies take on, right? Like drinking alcohol and not getting good sleep. And sometimes it sounds silly for me to say that out loud because it's just part of the culture. That's just what you do. But the truth is, you can drink yourself to death. And if you have a mission and a purpose and you're running and gunning full speed, and then all of a sudden the train derails, and what I mean by that is when you transition out of the military and you're done, whether you get hurt or the end of your service or you retire, for a lot of folks, it feels like the train is derailing, a loss of identity. You come back to civilians that not only can you not joke around about stuff like we do in the military, they get offended. Everyone's offended about everything. But also they just don't really have any perspective outside of their little bubble. They don't understand life and death. They don't understand geopolitical issues. They don't understand global conflict. They don't understand that people will die every day. And in fact, that we have the greatest opportunity in living in the world right here in the United States. And it saddens, I think, the veterans to see people not appreciate what we're fighting for, not realize how good we have it. And so then integrating into a society of people that don't show up on time, don't have military bearing, don't watch what they say, feel like they're potentially victims and need everything given to them. This causes the veteran potentially to just slip back into drinking more, depression more. Anyway, so my story is all of those things, right? That I'm kind of telling my story, but then also seeing a bunch of other people struggle with that and sort of highlighting the focus of my research is sleep. I'm a sleep scientist. I just noticed that sleep was kind of at the center of all this. So whether the sleep was a problem, and then we're using stimulants to wake up in the morning and sedatives or Ambien or whatever, alcohol to go to bed, sleep just seems to be at the center of everyone's problems, especially surrounding mental health. And so I dedicated my life to that. Some years ago, there was a very tragic incident that triggered this. I'd be happy to talk with your guests about that. But yeah, it's been like a decade in sleep science, and I've been fortunate enough to help a lot of people, and I'm not going to stop that. So, and that's the 62 Romeo mission, is to do that.
Fantastic. So, this is a deeply, concerning issue for me, something, I care a lot about, having, being a military veteran myself. Right now, the active duty military community and the veteran community are facing a mental health crisis. I think there are a number of issues that are contributing to that. I know that's an area of expertise for you. Certainly, you're very familiar with it. You could talk a little bit about Ryan's story, but I think when we look at the community as a whole, there's been some policies that have been put into place to try and help address the issue. Very well-intentioned policies, but we haven't really cracked the surface yet to solve the real problem.
Yeah, and I don't know if we ever will, but I'd be happy to talk about it and some of the things that I think might help. You mentioned Ryan Larkin. This is Ryan Larkin's memorial band that I wear, and I wear his dog tags every day. And the reason why is not to stay sad about his loss, but to remember him. And even though it was a suicide, it's something that we don't want to talk about. A lot of people don't want to talk about the suicides. He was a Navy SEAL. He was an incredible human being, and this never should have happened. So why did it happen? When I looked at it, I saw a guy who was at the top of his game, but he was struggling with injuries. He had some traumatic brain injuries, of course, orthopedic injuries, Mikah, as you know, what comes with the territory. And then probably some mental health stuff going on. Maybe he saw too many things that bothered him. At any rate, what I observed, because objectively, all of us in naval special warfare suffer with those ailments. In fact, Dr. Free outlined the operator syndrome, which is a unique constellation of injuries that are very common and trademark for our community. And so with that, all of us have these injuries, but not all of us commit suicide. So why did Ryan? And my hypothesis, which can never be proved, is that his sleep health was at the core of this decision. Now, what I do know is that I saw his sleep start to go downhill over a period of time. That was exacerbated with stimulants to wake up and alcohol to go to sleep, sometimes combined with Ambien. At the time, Navy was just issuing Ambien like a Pez dispenser. And then what I saw was a couple of bad turns that potentially impacted his mental health. And then he was awake for 5 days before he took his life. So all of those things to me felt like it was sleep. And this is one of my teammates. I'm very intimately connected to this person. And so it meant a lot. So it wasn't just a random guess at a topic that didn't mean anything to me. This is the best I could figure out. And so admittedly, in the beginning, I tried to use technology to figure out how to get better sleep for folks. I wanted to help people in my community. But what I saw was that there is a big problem with sleep across all of the SEAL teams. And I kept digging and I found out that there's a big problem with sleep in the entire Navy. And I continued digging, and guess what? There is a big sleep problem in the entire military. And to go another step further, in the United States, and in every first world country that is driven by capitalism and economic growth, sometimes you see people getting less sleep to get more work, to make more money. I get that. But definitely we're struggling as a society with sleep. But the military in particular, and I'll go ahead and say the first responders also are struggling big time with sleep. I've done a lot of work with them, but the military specifically, we are losing billions of dollars a year to avoidable mishaps. So what do I mean by that? I'm not just talking about the millions of dollars it takes to make a Navy SEAL. What about the 3 jets that we dropped out of the sky in Q1 during training of this year? How much does a jet cost? Why was a jet dropped? I assure you, it's not because these pilots are not trained well. It's almost always a maintenance issue. It's almost always because of fatigue. When I started my career back in 2017, it was surrounding an investigation where 2 Navy ships collided with 2 carrier ships out in the ocean. Now, a Navy ship should never, when you talk to the merchant Marines, they laugh about it, right? A Navy ship should never be in a collision like this. It's not a wartime situation. It is a pure negligent situation. So, not to point any fingers, when we looked at the investigation, it turned out that it was sleep. It was fatigue. And in fact, every single avoidable mishap is due to sleep or fatigue, and it happens all day long, every day. And so what I've highlighted in a paper that I wrote to Mr. Hegseth, the Secretary of War currently, is that I think that we can do better. I think that if we take the approach of weaponizing wellness for the warfighter, what we can do is empower better performance with the individuals, which results in better long-term outcomes, which I'll talk about health and mental health, long-term outcomes related to sleep. But in the short term, when we look at the individual performance of an operator, of a person driving the ship or a boat or a plane or the maintenance crew or air crew, when these people don't get sleep, lives are lost, or, at a minimum, we're losing tax dollars to a mishap that destroys a piece of military equipment. And this stuff happens all day long. And I don't mean to call out the Department of War. I think we're doing a great job. I think that the new administration has made strides in improving our military and the standards, but we still have a long way to go. And so I don't want to criticize as much as I want to be supportive. I will step up to the plate. I will continue to support our Pentagon. If we have better systems to get better recovery, we will have better outcomes in the short term and the long term. Andy, did you have a question?
I have so many questions for you, Rob. One of the questions that I have is about this paradox of the superhuman. I mean, we're talking about Navy SEALs, right, who are among the most elite operators in the world and are really put under, extreme circumstances to sustain what most humans aren't built to sustain. And one of the questions I have there is, for our military to basically, break or push humans to their edge, right, to sustain this amount of endurance. What are we doing on the other side of that to kind of immerse people back in, just as you were saying earlier about, how do we sort of reassimilate, elite Navy SEALs into society, right? How do we help them reemerge in society in a new and different way among those who are not equipped in the same way, in this like sort of superhuman capacity? But what I'm thinking about that is too, I guess my real question is, has that exacerbated over time? Has this become more difficult to sort of, reassimilate into civilian life? Or what are we really doing for the sustaining, 40 and 50 years after service is done, that elite time where, you and other SEALs and others who are sort of like, even elite athletes, those who are basically built to do what most people are not capable of doing. How do we sustain, or what do you recommend for sustaining? Sleep is one of those things for certain, right? I mean, I'm a wellness practitioner myself, so this means a lot to me. What your work is much overlapping with part of my research as well, which is the well-being of humans. But what are we doing to sustain their performance and also the reassimilation?
That brings up an incredible topic. And believe it or not, this is how the conversation goes each time, because I'm asking a question. Why don't we get better sleep, right? We have 22 veterans a day that are committing suicide. Now that number goes up and down, but we have that trademark hashtag 22 to represent the average, right? We are still losing a tremendous amount of veterans to suicide every single day. Why is that? Obviously mental health. I would say that most mental health DSM-5 diagnosable conditions are exacerbated by sleep, and with better sleep will be completely eliminated, short of major depressive disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, the big ones. But like what we're looking at with the DSM-5 is a manual for a business model for pharmaceutical companies, when in fact we can resolve a lot of these issues with sleep, nutrition, exercise, and so forth. And so perhaps the solution to some of the challenge we face in the veteran community is connectedness, sticking together, and having the aptitude to do those things that we know help each other out. But the big topic that comes up when I bring this up, which is what you're highlighting, Annie, is that when I talk about, oh, why don't we all get better sleep? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all get the Ben Greenfield 8.5 hours of sleep and get perfect nutrition and get perfect sunlight and have all these human hacking factors? And at SEAL Team 6 and Dam Neck, they do try to do that. But at the end of the day, what I have to clarify here is that I am not saying that we need a weaker fighting force. I am not saying that everyone is going to get perfect sleep, or that's not possible. What I'm saying is that when we are in a military operation, a real world mission, you will sleep deprive. You may sleep deprive to complete the mission. You will do everything within your power to complete that mission. If you're in an operational training environment, you have to train like you fight. You will probably sleep deprive. But there is absolutely no excuse to continue that behavior in garrison. That is the differentiation. And what we're seeing is a lack of availability to ever get recovery. And so within the military ranks, and what we see is sort of a time debt. And the military, I understand why, but they will take everything that you have and just a little bit more. And then it'll start to cut into your sleep time, and they'll ask a little bit more of you. But the problem is they don't have to pay back that debt. You do, as the warfighter, as the military person. And so, like the work we've done at Naval Postgraduate School, which is surrounding structuring a circadian watch cycle. So, for example, back in Vietnam era, we had like 5 and dimes, and we did that actually more recently than you think. But 5 and dime is 5 hours on, 10 hours off. What that means is you're on a 15-hour day. Now we know with science that we have a 24-hour day. Shocker, right? And what happens is when we're functioning on a 15-hour day, all of our circadian rhythms get out of alignment, specifically the rhythms surrounding hormones and endocrine function, as well as other things. But when those are out of sync, we start to see the development of hypertension, of increased cancer rates, issues with mental health. Obesity starts to be an issue. Sleep health is directly linked to our ability to control our body fat and weight. So what the change was with the circadian watch bill was to say, okay, we need to get a 24-hour structure. If we're able to work on a 24-hour structure, then our body can understand that. It doesn't understand a 15-hour day. That doesn't exist. That's torture. That's torturing someone, and their body starts to break down. So the first step is, okay, we have a 24-hour day. All right. So now we need to get a consistent sleep period within that 24-hour day. So now if we have a consistent sleep period, then the warfighter can do whatever is tasked of him or her during the wakeful hours and still get that consistent sleep period. That consistency is so absolutely crucial. So that's a big deal. Now to take it a step further, and where my research and where I focused on, it's like, okay, great job, Dr. Nita Shattuck and Dr. Rachel Markwald of the Navy. But now we have to look at what is the quality of the sleep within that sleep period. And look, I get that this all sounds like I'm trying to be soft on these people, but really I'm just trying to provide a basic opportunity for recovery. If we get better recovery each night, we will make less mistakes. Less people will commit suicide, less hypertension, cancer, obesity, all these things I'm talking about. And when we have less mistakes, less money is lost. We're talking about billions of dollars a year of lost military equipment due to mishaps that are avoidable, that always come back to fatigue. That is the truth. And so if we're making our warfighters' lives better, we're making them more operationally efficient, and we're saving money because we're making less mistakes and smashing trucks and tanks, right? Then our military is better. And so if we look at it from a budgetary constraint, we are actually saving the taxpayer money. But I think more importantly, and what I want to focus on is if the warfighter is optimized, they will do a better job at accomplishing the mission with less loss of life. That is the most important thing. And with less loss of life, better recovery, less trauma, just a better overall experience, they're going to have better outcomes in the long term. And now that's, the VA's problem. And they have to deal with all of these challenges that are 20 years old. And their toolbox, it often is just pills. It's often what the big corporations are giving them. So I want to articulate one thing, and this will really hit home with you, Mikah, is that if sleep and cognition is objectively a factor in mission success, meaning we know that if you're sleep deprived, you're going to make mistakes. We know we have a direct correlation to blood alcohol equivalency in sleep deprivation, meaning if you've been up for a 20 hours straight, then you might as well have had a beer. 24 hours, you're 0.10. We can correlate that directly. And so we have a sleep deprived military. You can't drink and pull the trigger, no jigger to trigger, but you can sleep deprive and pull the trigger. And lives are at risk here. So what I'm saying is that if we are going to plan a mission and we are going to use what's called the ORM, the Operational Risk Mitigation Model, and we are going to plug in risk factors, like, for example, when we lost our 2 SEALs at the sea state last January, when they looked at the sea state for this mission, they said it's a high sea state. Okay, it's at nighttime. What's the distance? What are all the risk factors? If we are not putting the sleep and recovery into the ORM as a major factor, we are completely blindsiding ourselves and we're ignoring one of the biggest factors to mission success. And so I would encourage ORMs to start including fatigue management into their mission planning for a better mission success, as well as all the positive long-term outcomes come with that. And so I'll pause there, but the reason that we can't do that right now is because we don't have a way to regulate and measure that. And that's also something that I'm working on.
If you were to zoom out from your work with warriors and first responders, which is, of course, excellent work and very necessary for all the reasons that we just talked about. But when we think about this as like a social structural change, right, we have asked of society to basically be productivity robots in lieu of what's forthcoming with, with AI coming down the pike and just the nature of robots sort of taking over a lot of capacities. I mean, it is happening. So what I'm thinking about is the productivity expectations we have of humans as we attempt to or we have an opportunity to harness the power of all of this, what's going on in society right now, leveraging some of the examples that you're doing and the good work that you're doing for military and first responders. How do we drive change and transformation across society for all people? What would you extract from your efforts and the work that you're doing to apply to society for the greater good of humans in our society?
We need to know our boundaries. We need to know what's healthy. We need to have discipline. And if you don't have the discipline and, knowledge to be able to survive in these highly chaotic and intense environments, I think the solution is very simple. We got to get back out in nature. We have to get a little closer to the simple life where happiness is abundant, where the ease of life is present. Like, we don't have to necessarily do anything right now. Only what is required to eat and drink and survive, right? I mean, like, I know I'm oversimplifying that, but I think there's a fear because there's a lack of knowledge. The knowledge of how to plant a seed and grow a plant is starting to go away. And so if I were to encourage anything, Annie, it would be to shift people out of the cities back into rural farmland, teach them the skills of how to survive and sustain, and also get back to those natural food products that nourish our body. That all of this sounds fundamental and, pretty basic, but actually most people are not eating natural foods. They're not getting natural sunlight in the same way every day. And their lives are chaos. And then we wonder why we have such a big mental health problem. And then we turn on to the TV and it says, take a pill for your problems. And then that makes things worse. So
Totally agree. I'll throw one thing in there because I think it might be a really cool addition given the kind of nexus of policy, technology, and purpose. Rob, I'd love to get your thoughts on, what about equipping every, soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine, right, with sensors, right? Like, we know, we could measure, our, all of our biosignals using things like Whoop, right? And, being able to actually monitor our sleep, being able to see, how people are performing, from a health perspective. Certainly in the military, we don't have, the same kind of HIPAA requirements, right? They have in the civilian world. And I think, that the idea of the surveillance state in the civilian world, in terms of like, these kinds of devices gets a little overblown. But I think, when it comes to, war fighters, I think there might be some there, in terms of our ability to, collect data, assess data, because there's certainly, AI tools, right, that can detect patterns in health. It can both physically and mentally, right, to detect, your propensity for a health related issue or a mental health, crisis like suicide. What are your thoughts on maybe using some of the defense budget to actually track the health and performance
we're doing that right now. This is the Oura Ring 4. It's fantastic. I feel like it is the premier wearable right now. Whoop 4 was the top one for a while. So a couple things. We're spending about $300 million a year on wearables in the military. Another thing is that over at Walter Reed Medical Center, we actually are using AI to detect issues. In fact, how do you know if you've prevented a suicide? You don't really, right? But we have prevented suicides because there is a change in the measurable analytics of the person's primarily sleep. Sleep is directly related to mental health, and they're able to have an intervention. Now, there are some restrictions with that. Just because we're in the military doesn't mean that you can monitor everybody all the time. You do have to have permission, and there are some constraints there. Now, one thought is that, for example, the big Navy, this has come up, right, with Whoop. When Whoop published a report on blast exposure in naval special warfare, the instant knee-jerk reaction was, oh, nobody's wearing Whoops anymore. Everybody take them off. No Whoops are allowed in training environment. And so the military doesn't necessarily want everyone to know how bad our sleep is or how bad our recovery is. In fact, it's a dirty little secret, right? We keep pushing people to the edge. And what I would say is we're only going to get better to bring this stuff to light. The more that we can illuminate this stuff and talk about it. For example, yes, this air crew is fatigued, and yes, the jets flying on the top deck of an aircraft carrier is keeping them awake. How do we structure things to maximize human performance? Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about human performance. We're talking about immediate military objective outcomes, as well as long-term health that impacts not only the individual at the VA, but their career. How long can they operate? How long can they be functionally relevant within a 20 to 30-year career? All of these choices in terms of getting better sleep, better recovery, better situation for the individual lead to better outcomes. But there's also another caveat with that. So let's say that we're measuring people with one of these wearables, and the commander's intent is to have everyone recovered for a mission at 04 tomorrow. And then the feedback loop comes back and it says, looks like 30% of our warfighters are not recovered to a certain extent. Do they bypass that risk in an operational risk management profile? Do they accept that amount of risk? And what is the culpability of that warfighter, that leader, if they make that decision? And then on the other side, what if the person who is the military person begins to abuse the metrics that come from these measurement devices to gain better favor within their career, or avoid a mission, or get some type of a medical status that gets them into a more optimal situation that they don't necessarily deserve? You see where I'm going with that? So once we open up the door to doing analytics, I think we have to be careful because we do want to go that way. We do want to have a green light, red light for mission go, no-go criteria because lives will be saved. But we have to have some level of latitude for the leaders to override that, and we have to have some type of training wheels and constraints so it's not abused, if that makes sense.
Rob, relative to the forces of change society is facing right now, what are the 4 forces driving transformation that you think leaders, policymakers, and citizens should be paying attention to?
4 forces. I would say that just broadly, I think that we've got a problem with our nutrition. I think the health and wellness of our society is directly impacted by poor nutrition. The ultra high processed foods, we got to get rid of them. The second factor, I think, is the proliferation of pharmaceuticals, especially as a primary, prognosis, diagnosis path. I think that we have all the solutions that we need to health and wellness in nature. And oftentimes herbs and food are our medicine, not a very expensive prepackaged pill. I do think that health is important, and oftentimes we do need better care than just eating plants and herbs. And when those individuals go into a hospital, I think another big challenge, another force is that the hospital systems as business models have really just gone crazy with what they charge, how they function, the growing requirements for doctors. And it's become one of these things where the hospitals are kind of, in my opinion, monopolies that run a criminal empire. That's not entirely true, but when you look at the numbers, definitely the staff that work at the hospital are not the primary focus, and definitely the patients that come into the hospital are not the primary focus. So who is the primary focus? And it looks like it's the shareholders. And so then finally, I'll say the insurance companies. The insurance companies are the other end of this hospital, at least in on health insurance. And I find that the regulation of pricing and how they pay and who they pay, and when someone is facing a end of life scenario, and when the insurance company decides not to cover things for higher profitability, and for example, using AI analytics to deny claims in ways that will not be uncovered or seen to increase profitability. A lot of this comes back to greed, doesn't it? But those factors, I think, getting at health and wellness through nutrition, limiting pharmaceuticals, being careful with hospitals, and regulating insurance. I think these mega powerhouses, and oftentimes are big corporations and boards that are leading these decisions. I think those forces are, coming from, as a sleep scientist in the health and wellness community, those 4 forces are probably the biggest ones that I encounter every day that I would like to see reform.
Awesome. So final question. In the last year, right, what was a book that you've read that you think our listeners should read, and why?
Well, there's a lot of books that I've read in the last year. The one that comes to mind, I would say one of the most cool books that I've read recently was Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. What a great book. He goes into a lot of stuff and questions a lot of people's motives, and he's just very fair and raw about it. Obviously, my book, 62 Romeo, I don't want to self-promote, and also it's just a manual for the Sleep 101 program. But I am interested in writing another book, the Weaponizing the Wellness for the Warfighter memorandum that I sent to the Pentagon. I've gained a lot of interest in turning that into a book, and so if people think that's a good idea, I'd love to hear feedback. If people want to hear more about health and wellness, specifically focused on sleep, for our warfighters.
You should absolutely write that book. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know you're a super busy guy with a lot on his plate right now. So, you taking the time to talk with Annie and I was a real treat. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.